I'd like to welcome everyone to our Committee of the Whole meeting for Thursday, March the 10th. Calling this meeting to order, confirmation of agenda. Madam Clerk, anything?
Sure. I guess the only changes through you, Mr. Mayor, is that we will be switching item 5B to be the first item from staff report, and the 5A will be the second report this morning. Nothing
further. Anything from council? Seeing none, any disclosure of pecuniary interest yet or nature thereof? No. Seeing none, the adoption minutes on March 3rd Committee of the Whole meeting, please.
Moved by Councillor Mellon, seconded by Deputy Mayor Gardner, that the minutes of the Committee of the Whole held on March 3rd, 2022 of the 7th Council of the Municipality of South Dundas be adopted as circulated.
Any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, all heard in motion, those in favor, opposed if any, motion carries. So we'll move on to staff reports, and the first one is, Madam Clerk has alluded to, will be the Master Fire Plan and Risk Assessment. So welcome, Chief.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So as in the report that I submitted, we are looking to get ahead of the mandatory certification, and I think this will help us get there by having a new Master Fire Plan and a risk assessment done for the municipality. The current Master Fire Plan we are working on was approved in 2014 by the Council of the Day. It was a great start. The appendix or the attachment that I had on in the report of the 52 recommendations, the ones in yellow are complete. The ones in green have not been completed, but if you look at the ones in green, they are basically all the same. You know, new fire hall in Morrisburg, full-time deputy chief hired for 2020, which we didn't do. Permanent fire prevention person, well, we've kind of combined that, we have combined that with our assistant. In that job, 34 bylaw for safety boxes, we can work on that in the future. 45, 46, the deals with dry hydrants, which we've been talking about for the last few years, and so does 54. So basically we've knocked off everything we can of the 54 recommendations at this time for the Master Fire Plan. So it's my opinion, and I feel that we should be getting that rewritten and redone to include the process of how we're going to go forward, or help us get forward with the mandatory certification. Also in 2018, the former Liberal government put a reg in, Ontario Reg 37818, which is under the discussion in the report. It does say that every municipality must develop a risk assessment by July 1st, 2022. In there talks about what needs to be in the risk assessment. I think having a third party do a risk assessment along with a new Master Fire Plan would be, again, a great idea for levels of service in our ENR bylaw, where we are in our training, again, some help to get us through to firefighter certification for July 1st, 2026. I figure that probably a combined Master Fire Plan risk assessment, from what I'm talking to the people that have had them done, are somewhere between 50 and 75,000. Unfortunately, I don't have any money in my reserve, but I think we could maybe sweet talk finance and the CAO of maybe taking it out of the working reserves, and we could pay it back over the next couple of years. If you have any questions or comments, I would be happy to answer them at this time.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple of, obviously it's a plan. I think with the provincial changes, there's going to be a significant shakeup in potentially how we do business when delivering those services. So all I would recommend is in that. We need to also see if the consultant can look for efficiencies. And by efficiencies, I don't necessarily mean cutting. I mean, are we lean and mean as far as how we deliver the service? Even the makeup of the building, is the space being used correctly in each building? Because I think it's pretty low hanging fruit to just say we need a new fire hall. without actually looking at the footprint that we have and making sure that it is as efficient as possible. So those would just be my only comments that, and hopefully comparables to like municipalities, I think is virtually important and, or vitally important, I should say. But the efficiencies, sometimes we miss that with the consultants, and it's nice to dream, but it would be nice. They really have to look at the footprint we already take up. So thank you. And the sweet talk thing too, Cam.
Councilor Lewis?
I do believe it is time to update our master plan. The one that we have now in place is 8 years old. It's most likely starting to get some dust on it. And most likely some of the stuff that is in the master plan has been outdated for a while now. I'm on the same ship as the deputy mayor about the new fire hall. Do we need one? Maybe, maybe not. But why would you pick Morrisburg for the new fire hall to be?
It would, when we talked back in the day, the senior staff that we had at the time, that was the one that they just picked. We've kind of, it is full, you know, the bunker gear is sort of, we need to outlay where it is, number one. Office space is kind of tight, but again, I agree with the deputy mayor that, you know, we can look at the whole picture rather than, and that was why I never pushed the new fire hall. I think that's just too much of a blanket statement, you know, and we need a new fire hall. It's too easy to say that without doing the homework and making sure we are covering all the boxes.
Well, yeah, and that's what I was thinking. That's it for me. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Councilor Mellon?
Yeah, I'm not sure. 50 to 75,000 is a lot of money, especially if we don't have any in the reserve. It has to come out of the working reserve right now. Is that right, Shannon?
Yes, correct.
Okay. You had said, Cameron, that community risk assessment has to be completed by, in your report it says July 1st, 2024.
Yes,
Oh, so we got,
it's just a little over 2 years.
we got 2 years to do it. My question is, when we did that 8 years ago, I think it was a worthwhile exercise because we were trying to, you know, combine the three separate stations that were sort of running their own little way, and we just had a new fire chief that had only been here for maybe a year. And I think it was a worthwhile exercise for a third party to come in and to evaluate our whole fire emergency services at that time. My apprehension on this is that can this not, some or all of this not be done in-house between yourself, Chris, you know, deputy chiefs, you know, doing some brainstorming between yourselves with Shannon, maybe even council, instead of spending the, you know, that kind of money on a fire master plan, which I think is a good document. But I'm just thinking when you looked at the report, you know, the amount of things that were recommended in the first one, some of them, you know, I'm be honest with you, looking back, we could have probably, well, it was a different beast back then, 8 years ago. 9 years ago, probably, when we went ahead and, you know, had that report done. We've had it since 8 years. But you know, some of this stuff, I think we could have maybe, you know, come up with, you know, some of this stuff on our own without spending, you know, but I think it was a worthwhile exercise back then. I'm just thinking now, how will this report, if we hire an outside consultant, will they be consulting with yourself and the deputy chief?
They'll take the same process that they did before. They'll sit down with myself, the deputies, some of the firefighters, with council, the CAOs.
Well, yeah, okay, so then, you know, we're gonna bring in a third party in, look at our fire and emergency services, and more than likely take the recommendations that we're going to be giving to them and put it on a fancy piece of paper and charge us $75,000. Maybe I'm wrong. And the risk, the community risk assessment, that one really jumped out at me. Basically, we're going to identify risk in our community in
So
that one.
in that, we have to go through, build a plan. We have to look at all the building construction within the municipality, which means, you know, the townhomes, lightweight construction. We have to look at all our industry in our municipalities to see if we are doing, and we have the equipment that we need to do. There's a lot more to it than just saying this is a risk assessment. It takes in fact our E&R bylaw, making sure we have the levels of service that we need out there.
Because to me, who knows what our community risk assessment is better than yourself and other members of staff, whether it's Public Works or members of council, you know, brainstorming these sort of things. You know, if you look at it and say, well, you know, we got maybe more hazardous goods running up and down the 401 because the traffic's increased, number 2 and 31. You know, that, to me, you know, yeah, okay, we're gonna look at our residential, we look at the increase in the residential, you know, with Dutch Meadows, and we have 2 years to do that. That's why I sort of question whether or not we need to go outside and bring somebody in that doesn't know South Dundas, and they consult with us and then give us a report that is going to say what, basically, in all due respect, they're going to say, well, this is what you're telling us needs to be done, and they're going to put it on a piece of paper and give it to us. In my mind, maybe I'm missing the point, but maybe I'm missing the whole thing, but you know, as far as our equipment goes, our training goes, we've been, you know, we've got it up to the levels that we need it to be at, and anything going forward will always be met at that high level, whatever the province is dictating under the new regulations and stuff. So, you know, that sort of thing, you know, the old age-old question of whether we need a new fire station in Morrisburg, you know, yeah, it'll probably be front and center again, you know, on this. And a few other things that, you know, are probably a carryover from the report 8 years ago, but, you know, anything we buy now, our training, our equipment, our trucks, all meet that level of certification or, you know, qualify what we need to have. So that's my question, is whether or not this can't be done somewhat in-house, if you will, Mayor Byvells.
Response?
The only concern I have there, Councillor, is I'm just afraid of missing something, because with mandatory certification and all the other work we do, this is, like you say, this is going to take a year or more to write, and I'm concerned about time, number one. Number two, I think from what the ones I've seen developed, the municipalities that had them done, they work, and it's found areas of deficiencies that the fire department didn't even know they had, the community didn't even know they had.
Like I say, that's my only concern is,
And, you know,
you have a pretty good, to me, our fire, yourself, and, you know, our other firefighters and staff, other members of staff, and council for that matter goes, I think can have a pretty good grip on this without going outside, especially when we got to take it out of the working reserve to come up with, you know, $50,000 or $75,000. You know, I don't know. I know I got that little binder you have here on your desk, Chief, at home somewhere. I probably looked at it 3 different times over the years, and it's all very nice. But that's my take on this, Mayor Byvells.
Okay. So my thinking on it is that I do believe we should have someone look at our fire service from a master fire plan point of view and doing it. And the risk assessment, I think, is something that we need outside eyes to look at, and those who can think that one through, because we tend to be a little blind to what we need. You know, I think one of the largest risks we have in the village of Iroquois is a big industry that I hate to get rid of, but, you know, if a fire started there, and there has been some incidents, I'm not sure I'd want to be in the Ross building too long. So that's, you know, and then we have, you know, the farming community and what their requirements are, and we're working with what we need. We also have Upper Canada Village that we never talk to. If the fire started there, how are you getting in? Like, there's things that if somebody else might think of, we don't think of. Much as I just thought of a bunch. The initial fire master plan that's sitting on your desk was a challenge to the council of the day, because it presented a lot of ideas that we weren't ready for. We haven't done everything there because they didn't work for South Dundas, and that's our biggest risk. I think it's nice to get someone else to look at it, and here they say, well, this is what you need to do, and the council, this council or the next council look at it and say, we can't do that. We can't afford to do that. It doesn't work for our community. So the key would be the right consultant. Doesn't need to be cheap. He needs to be right. And you're shaking your head, but I don't know how easy they are to find out there, but it's got to have, you almost need to work with a consultant that knows what fire and emergency services work for a municipality like ours, which has villages and a lot of rural areas. Plus the river, which we've discounted, but you know, somebody's going to probably come back and say you should be doing something out there. But anyway, I think it really comes down to whether it's this council does it or the next council does it. That's your choice. So you can think that through. If you feel we shouldn't do it, that's fair enough. The next council can make that decision. They're not going to really have a decision because the government's going to say thou shall, and it is their thou shall. The chief's going to come next budget and say I need to do this. So it's either do it now or do it later. And I'm willing to at least look at doing it now, because I think we're due. Chiefs wanting to do it. We're at a point we should at least look at it because of the certification and having to do things. The opportunity's there, and it's one less thing to deal with on an election issue that some people will understand and others will not, and some knowingly will make something out of it. That's pretty well, I can guarantee it. And that sounds political, but that's the reality of the situation. I know it will be. So my question back to Treasury, how comfortable are you taking that out of the working reserve if this council goes ahead, Sean?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The fire reserve fund, unaudited at this point, has an amount of $55,000. That's a reserve fund. So that can be channeled towards the fire master plan the council wishes to receive this year.
And if it doesn't cover it?
We can take it from the fire reserve, which has encumbrances for other costs, and subsequently pay those back in the future, or we can take it from the working reserve or any other that council wishes.
So basically, in theory, we can spend the money, but the next budget's going to have to account for it.
Correct.
Because if we take it all to reserve that we started to save up for equipment and stuff will be gone, and I don't think that's the smart thing to do in the end. Basically, we're committing the next budget for this. So we either do it now or we allow it to happen next year. So I'm good with it. I think it's, you know, as long as it's done well, and I'll be honest, there's a risk. Chief knows this. You get a piece of paper like that one there, as we came and said, we gotta do this, we gotta do this. And it's scary because it's not thousands of dollars. It'll add up in a hurry. you know, the station, and when I look at things, I look at, say, okay, what is the, you know, look at the efficiency. Not every station needs all the toys. Which one needs the toy, and then who do we send out? And because everybody likes to do everything, but is that the smart thing to do for a 3-department fire department? I mean, we always have the big hole that's, you know, in the northwest corner that we always have to work with North Dundas on unless we do something different. And it may suggest that. I think the last one did suggest we do something in the Matilda area, but nothing's been done yet, and I'm not saying we have to do anything either. So that's my thinking. I think council has to decide whether they think it's worthwhile. I think in the end it's worthwhile. It's just, do we do it now, or do we land it on the next council and let them figure it out? So.
Well, I'm sitting here listening to the discussion. My only hesitation in this is the fact that if we agreed to it today, you would go out, you'd probably get it by June, right? You'd know the consultants somewhat. So then you've got the brand new council sitting here who potentially could have 5 new folks sitting at the table. And then you're going to scare them with these big numbers with no background in the fire stuff and no history. I mean, even though I'm a first-term council member, I've still been here for 3 years, had lots of discussions, and I have a lot more than I would have, say, I don't know, December 2nd, 2018. So that is my big fear in this. If we're going to, and I, to Councillor Mellon's point, that's a big number, and it, you know, people hate consultants. So if we're going to do it, but you are definitely risking having 5 brand new people potentially. Maybe not. It'd be great if it's the same, but and then they're going to get scared, and we would have wasted the money. That's my the timing is really off. If it was 2 years ago or even a year ago, I think I would have been all over it. If it's the right thing, we need to get really sharp on our demands with these consultants, because I do find sometimes it's a lot of fluff. But I'm really concerned about that, because you're risking it's going to get shelved anyway. So I just, and depending what the climate is, we've seen it before. If everyone hates what we did, the trend is to do the exact opposite. So, you know, I'm concerned about that, to be honest with you. I think if we do it, I think it has to be at the right time. And at this point, I don't think now's the right time.
Well, I know where the deputy mayor's coming from, and I know where Councillor Mellon's coming from. But this council, a little over 3 years that we've been here, we have taken no back seat to anything. We have made our decision. We stick to our decision. And our master plan is 8 years old. Our master plan, I think, is behind times. And the most important thing that we have to remember is our residents, the safety of our residents. And I'm not afraid to gamble on the $75,000 for a new updated master plan. So I say, let's spend the money, get it done, and let's move on. That's my 2 cents worth.
Councilor Mellon?
Oh, quick question, Sean, you said we have 55,000 in the fire reserve?
Reserve fund, yes.
That's it?
There's, the fire department also has a reserve that Cameron has been making contributions to for replacement of assets in the future. And those, so if we were to take money from that reserve, those funds would have to be replaced. Fire reserve fund has no encumbrances against it.
I'm not prepared to drain that fire reserve. And I'm not prepared to ask right now to come out of the working reserve when we're only a few short months out of, a couple short months out of budget. Perfectly honest with you, this should have been something on the budget, in the budget. You know, You had mentioned Upper Canada Village, and that's always been a sore on my side. I'm gonna just say, as far as I'm concerned, Upper Canada Village, they get ambulance service and they get the police service, but if they have a fire, for
Nope.
$5,500 a year, I'm not about to send our trucks down there, sorry. And unless we've talked about this and we've talked about this and we can't get anywhere with them, if they want us to provide them with fire and emergency services, it should be a special levy. And, you know, if they want to put their own fire department in there, that's fine, you know? But that's been a sore point with me for 11 plus years. It's still there. I know it's not a very nice thing to say, and a lot of people will think I'm a redneck from the boondocks, but if somebody don't pay in, every household here in Morrisburg is probably paying more taxes than they are. And they're the ones I'm worried about providing the service to them. Somebody like Upper Canada Village or the Parks Commission, you could, sorry, I'm ranting, Mayor.
You are, I think you need the,
You know, that's just,
you've made your point, how's
yeah,
that?
thank you. Right now, Mayor Bybels, Deputy Mayor Gardner's point is a very good one, that, you know, the timing of this right now with a new council, potentially a new council, coming in, I think it should be backed off until the new council comes in and they can discuss it and they can, you know, budget for it. That's my take on it. And analyze whether or not any of this can be done in-house. I'm still a little bit leery on that. I know where you're coming from, Cameron. I know what you're saying, but anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Okay. We seem to be split, which is okay. So my suggestion to you, Chief, is to, I'm not sure if we can shove it on Monday night's agenda, but you bring a report to council with your recommendation, and we've debated, we know the knowledge now. I think this is the opportunity we had to do that. We maybe have all 5 of us here, and then we can have a proper vote on it, and it's either up or down. I think bring it doesn't have to be as big as this, but I mean, just a concise report of what you want, where's the money coming from, and then we can make that decision. Go ahead.
Okay, so I, just to the next council, I was actually gonna wait till the next council to bring this forward. That was my master plan at the time. But with mandatory certification, that's what's bumped this up to Deputy Mayor Gardner to today. So I just wanted to explain that, so.
Okay.
Okay?
I think that's the fair way of doing it. We're not gonna give you the carte blanche today anyway, committee of the whole, so bring that report to council, and you know, we've got the weekend to think it through. I'm not saying people are gonna change their minds. I think a lot of good points were brought forward today, but let's have that vote at a council meeting, and then we can go from there.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. So we'll move on to the asset management plan and infrastructure tax rate. Lachlan, welcome. Sean, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for your time as well. So asset management planning, I'm sure you've heard of it before. It was Ontario Regulation 588.17 is where that came from. And I'll just read a little bit about it for those viewers at home in case they're not as familiar with it. So very, very quickly, it sets milestones for all townships, all municipalities in Ontario. The first milestone was the Strategic Asset Management Plan, which I believe came in front of you July 1st, 2019. Originally, it was July 1st, 2021 that core assets had to be done, and then that was moved to 2022 due to the pandemic. And then all other assets are included to be brought forth on 2023. That includes current levels of service, so the service you're providing for the dollars you have. Current performance, how you're performing against your expectations. And this will be, I should have started saying this is kind of conversation one of many. I'm sure we'll come to many committee of the wholes as we end with the auditors. I know Tyler Nelson is doing a great job with our asset information. So I'm excited to bring a little bit more substance next time. So thank you for your time here. Life cycle activities and costs. So let's take a regular road. All roads are mostly constructed, but there's micro-servicing, there's, I guess, asphalt, so double surface treatment, single surface treatment, and all these things, when planned accordingly, can save you money over time. It might cost you a little bit more in the short term, but letting a road go to, well, they never go to 0 because in theory all roads are drivable, but say it goes to 10, it's next to impassable. So if your road's at a 90, goes to 70, you do a little micro-surface, brings it up to 95, and that's kind of the idea behind asset management planning, is scheduling these events so that you most optimally use your budget, because we're all living an infrastructure deficit, unfortunately, across Ontario. Okay, so then I will get to the presentation. So thank you, and welcome audience. Collaborators, obviously you have your administrative lead, which is your CAO, and then the complete treasury department. So Sean Mason with this has worked very hard the last 2 years with Tyler, who obviously knows asset management coordinator, and I think you're going to, through subsequent meetings, see the fruits of all these efforts of these individuals. So an asset management plan logic, I wanted to run this through to make sure that we're clear. So council kind of sets the service level and the risk to administration. We should prepare you what it costs for this, and then the budget comes in. And so determine the cost to deliver the service that you want, that the community is asking for. We should report to council and that we're meeting those items. Offhand, if I'm thinking just fire was on topic, you could set a standard that every fire was responded to within 15 minutes. Is that the case? If not, do you need more, I guess, more financial backing, or what is inhibiting your service level from not being met? So then administration strikes the budget, balancing risk and service level, and always the ability to pay, because if you ask everybody, we've done a survey in my prior municipality in South Glengarry, and you ask people what is important without a comparison, everything's important. Sometimes it's nice to say, do you want low taxes or do you want this service? And that balance is crucial in this. And then administration delivers the report and we complete the cycle again. I guess I kind of talked on this one, a balancing act, levels of service versus levels of taxation. I don't envy the political specter of this, because from an administration point, I've been at South Glengarry over 7 years, and most of the things I say is we need to raise prices, raise taxation. We need to get our reserves to this level so that we can sustainably fund. And then you have the counter to that, which has to be reasonable to the taxpayer, and that's not an easy job. So I'll bring you information. You tell me how you want it. So this is the hard to sell portion of it. I use roofs because we all have one. So in 2022, let's say we have a roof replacement. We're assuming 40 years is the expected life cycle, and it's $40,000 to cost. So in 2062, you'll need $40,000 more. Again, not perfectly realistic, but for illustrative purposes. So you should, in theory, put $1,000 a year so that when that roof comes due, you have that money and you don't have to take it from taxation as well. Taxation and reserve transfers to me are to flatten your taxation. You don't want to have 1 year where you need a ton and it has to come from taxation. You want to constantly have that money coming out and into a reserve. So if you put this logic over all your assets, in theory there would be no debt. Now, in theory is always a lovely thing. Whenever the real world hits, that's not always possible. So the hard to sell portion of this is in year 2061, with $39,000 in reserve, citizens are going to say, or constituents or property owners will probably say you have too much in reserves and you're hoarding taxpayer dollars. And that's, again, a political thing that I don't so much have to deal with on the administrative side. The easy to sell thing is not having little crises here and there, so whenever it comes time to fix that roof, you have the money. So I think the way to ease concerns to the taxpayer, again, I put communication plan on the bottom, but I mean, I'm a sports person too, and some recreational. So communication is key in sports, it's key in municipality. Like, this is why we're doing it, this is what you're getting, and this is the cost to do it. If the citizens or the constituents don't like that, then we can change it, but the level of service, there's a balance there that has to be met. In looking at the reserve policy, I did notice a few things that said at the discretion of council. Perhaps firming that up, what does that mean? So if you have a reserve, there's a maximum, because you do not want to overtax, you do not want to hold money needlessly. And on the flip side, you also don't want to always be running into having no money. So if you have, say, this building and you were preparing $50,000 a year for it, maybe there's a maximum amount. So like, if the building through great maintenance and maybe perhaps an underly ambitious life cycle, you hit a point you don't continue contributing to that asset because you don't need it. And that's, I guess that's how I feel about, I'm generally, in fairness to council, this is our first time, so I'm generally known to defend reserves and place things as reserves. I don't know if you knew that about me, so I also, at the same time, like to spend reserves because you put them in there to spend on something, you're not there to hoard. So with that, removing sometimes at discretion, you know your line. That's your line in your sand. You hit that, and you're good. And then add any missing class reserves, and that will come through conversations on like core. So like you can have a bridge reserve, a roads reserve, a stormwater reserve, if you're so inclined, or you can just have one big pot. We'll come to you with a little bit more on that again. This is supposed to say high level, so I'll back myself up. Investment policy, I believe, and it says 10-year term. If you are looking to invest in 40 or 60-year assets, you put a new pipe in, it's plastic for, I'll stick on taxation side, not so much water, but say a storm drain, and it's going to last 80 years. Some of that money could be invested, and was it 2019? They brought in pecuniary interest, no, cheapers. It's an investment term that I'm forgetting presently, but allows you to invest slightly more, we'll say risky or aggressively, away from just your typical bonds and government GICs and commercial papers, and it allows you to have a little bit more revenue come from your reserve funds. So that's something the global treasury group, SDNG, is looking at, and that's something that could be an interesting avenue. I've always thought in a perfect world, a council could put $10,000 a year away for a reserve fund to offset taxation and just use the gains on that. That's not this conversation, but some of that money that's scheduled for 20, 40 years away could be earning a little bit more money, and that money could then decrease taxation requirements if it's successful. And I think that a council running a municipality is a going concern. This municipality, South Dundas, will live forever. So taking a little bit risk over, in theory, thousands of years should long-term pay off. There will be spike ups and downs, and you'd hate to put $1 million into a market and watch it go to 600,000, but the next 40 years will probably go up to like 2.5 million, or I guess the rule of 7. Anyhow, that's part of that. So thank you. And Councillor Mellon, you say you rant, I sometimes ramble, so if you need to bring me back, Mayor, please let me know.
It's contagious.
It is, yeah. It's first contact, you're the vector. So data difficulties. And we'll be coming with revised information. I kind of prepared the financial thing shortly after the budget because I just wanted to put it on paper because I think the word, and you saw it on the slide, is scarce with numbers, and I just wanted to start that. So full disclosure, this number will be refined, and as we get better information, it will always be refined. So in looking at PSAB information, it would say the replacement cost of your assets are $61 million. So in theory, your annual requirement in this case, and that's using useful asset, like across a lot of assets, so I didn't include it because it gets complicated, would be 1.3 million. So the hard thing about using historical data, and we get more information as, like, I use the Taylor Road Bridge because that was topical during that time, is often, if it's historical with 764,000 in our books, we saw that it was 1.8 million in the budget cycle. So that typically undervalues the amount that you need to prepare for. So our asset management-based information is the best information we have, and it will continue to get better as we get updated things. OSIM, your report 2021, I was talking to Tyler yesterday, and he said some of this bridge work will be, like, the numbers were increased, and it looks a little bit more, we'll say, realistic. But if you do have this, and this is just one asset in one asset type, that $1 million difference from what we're planning for, which is the actual reality, if you assume an expected life cycle of 50 years, you're talking a $20,000 per year under contribution to that asset, and if you think it's going to last 100 years, it's 10,000. So there's so many assumptions in here that it's not a perfect number, but we'll continue to revive it as we get more information. But it just shows you the problem of using historical data, which is typically what municipalities would have done. So we again talk to infrastructure deficit. This is not new information to anyone at council. If you're watching, it might be, and this is not atypical. In fairness to South Dundas, having I chair the asset management group within SDNG. Everybody's in this situation, and in this case, 400,000 is your low limit, 700,000 is your high limit. Our former mayor, Ian McLeod, who's an engineer, would say, if you ask somebody how often you should paint your house, he might say you have to paint it every 3 years. That service level conversation would be, is Council South Dundas okay painting your house every 5 years? And that can help. I believe Mayor Byvel's recently, and this is through a conversation at the fleet cycle, you can, if you move the expected life cycle of your fleet, you need to contribute less. So there are advantages, and you can change a lot with that. And I presented in 2019, I don't know who was here out of all of you, but like if you take your fire services, and I pick on fire just because it's sometimes easy and it's always safe because everybody loves fire. Your fleet, if you have your core fleet at 20 and you just change your secondary and tertiary fleet at 22 years, you can save tens of thousands of dollars across a fleet of vehicles. That's just, again, one asset in one department. But that is information from OSIM, so 400,000 would be the low limit that they're expecting, and there's $100,000 in the budget to transfer. So those are the realities that everybody's grasping, and that, again, is just one asset type now in the asset management plan. So council realities, and that's that political part that I don't envy, is you typically have 4 types of thoughts. Is we'll try to afford that, and then at some times another council comes in and it's like cut and slash the budget, and we won't afford that. And then there's a reality that you can't afford that. And I kind of think this council is looking through the budget and that infrastructure levy that we'll talk about later, is that we need to afford it, and it's one of those items where you'll typically see like where we are, where we need to be, how do you get there, or can we bridge at least some of it? And that's all at the same time as limited upper level government funding. So again, not an envious position to be. So when we're talking about tackling the infrastructure deficit, recognize your situation. If we start at day one, I believe that 1 million, is it 300,000? Sorry, 100, yeah. I talked about glasses last time, I should have done that. These numbers would be on the low side, because the Ontario Street, it's in the millions of dollars, and we're talking millions of dollars, not thousands or even hundreds of thousands. So we're not at day one. Our assets are probably 50% to 60% for the most part amortized, which again is based on straight line, which isn't perfect, but it's what we've got. And that's what Tyler will start coming with a little bit better than historical data. So we gather the best information, we make assumptions. Let's say 50% of all assets life has expired. So in your previous slide, you'll notice I changed it to 100%. That was just for the ease of understanding. So I'm just going to times that number by 2 because we're assuming that the replacement value, like we're halfway through and we haven't saved 1 million a year for particular assets. Update our numbers to reflect current construction realities. In this case, I used 50%, so you're plus 100 and plus 50. And some of that comes from my father's age-old advice is when you don't know the situation, like when you're renovating your house, if you have a $10,000 budget, you double it, you times it by 50, or 0.5, because that's where you're going to be, because there's so many, like in the world of infrastructure, geotechnical survey can throw a project that you think is going to be 100,000, and then all of a sudden it's 180,000. You have that times multiple things. But this again is, and I think the next slide says it, these numbers carry many assumptions and estimates. So this is the number, and it's big, 3 million plus. And I believe it was Mayor Byvelds that said, scare us with numbers. So I'm trying to scare you a little bit with numbers. If you look at your 22 budget, you're contributing to your road base and surface. You have 1.1 million going into capital, and there's 100,000 transferred to reserve. And based on these numbers, and we will come back to these numbers and refine them and have conversations, you require 2.7. So there's a 1.5 million deficit on roads. And again, not atypical. So those are just the core assets in the asset management plan. That will be due in July. So we'll have conversations on that, and then council's obligation will be to make sure we're doing the best surface treatment program we can, the best, making sure we maintain our roads at the right time. And that's a big thing from OGRA, like keep your good roads good and proper maintenance at the proper time. And then the obligation of council would be to set service levels versus taxation levels. So how do you feel about this? And these are just the big numbers. If you were to try and fix that particular number, and in talking to Tyler with revised numbers yesterday afternoon, he would say it's a little low. So a 36% increase in taxation, that's never going to fly. That's not something that I'm here proposing. It's just that's what like a big fix would bring you to. And it's totally unrealistic to expect that. And I'm not saying anywhere near that. Just give me that number. Information required, so we'll come to you with the asset management plan and a financial plan. That's to come. A short-term solution is always increased taxation reasonably. You have to consider an infrastructure levy, so that was next up, and then consider increasing transfers to reserves. And then the long-term reconstruction would just be build infrastructure sustainability into the budget, and that's that 36% or more or less, depending on how we revise our numbers and if service levels either increase or decrease. But it's trying to get there or trying to make some movement towards there. I think that would be like a prudent decision for council. So I put this one up there because a taxpayer one time, and this is again the burden of being in treasury and on the political side, is it is hard-earned money, and he wrote spend it wisely, and I read further in a, I believe it was a Municipal World, that said it's not spending it in your community, it's investing in your community. So it's not about trying to take things away, it's about investing it properly. And I heard Deputy Mayor Gardner earlier mention something about what lifts, and one of my favorite quotes would be like, you look at your body and you say, whenever it comes to business, is you look at like what lifts and remove as much fat as you can from your business, and then you have to look at that muscle and say what lifts well. And that's not, again, a fun thing, because once somebody is given a service, it's very hard to take away, and I'm not suggesting you have to take away anything, it's just acknowledging what you have and the cost to it. I believe there's a municipality in downtown Ontario, so like York, Scarborough, Halton, that actually cleans windrows after the plow goes by. They have a crew that cleans the windrows. It's expensive, they don't want to do it administratively, but if you try and take that away, imagine never having to shovel your driveway at the end again when the plow goes by. So you give, very hard to take back, because there's no political appetite to do it, but every person in the country here, you shovel your driveway when the plow goes by. So that's the give and take of service levels, is once it's given, it's harder to take back, so just be considerate of what we do from now on, and if there's anything that's easy to take off, that's a political decision with asset management planning service levels. So I come back to this slide because, and I do watch council meetings still from South Glengarry, and I pick up on other ones. I typically watch tax ones across SDNG. Budget time, taxation, in between, increased services, and then you hear it even amongst this council, like, let's try and, give a little bit more. But, and then the budget, I think you did a very prudent job of like trimming parts, like I just mentioned, like trimming the fat and perhaps asking the muscle can you lift, but at one point if you want more, there has to be more, or we can do less, and then efficiencies, and you hope to find efficiencies where you can, because that's the great win, like extra service, no extra taxation, like that's the drive, and that's hopefully where asset management leads us. Yep. And I kind of put them together, so if you don't mind moving into the infrastructure levy conversation, or do you want to, I can take a moment here, because I've talked for a good amount of time without stopping, so if you
Okay, so any comments, questions, concerns over the asset management part, not any further into the infrastructure levy? Councillor Mellon, start.
Yeah, I'll start. Sure. I was wrong. I remember when asset management first came out, I thought, oh, this is a crock of, this is just not worth it. What are we doing here? But boy, we've been slapped up alongside the head. And if you just look at our bridges in the last 5 years, we've had 4 fail, 4 that have been condemned. 2 have been removed, 1's been rebuilt, another one's in the process of being replaced. And the cold hard reality of the situation is we're behind the 8 ball so bad that you can't even see the rest of the table. What we need to do is not a very pretty thing, especially in the world we're in today. When I come in town today, I see diesel at $2.6 a liter. Everybody's being affected by, supply shortages and an increase in everything. But we're only kidding ourselves if we don't start addressing this, and I totally agree, we can't get there all in one shot. I know I had suggested at budget time we needed to put another 100,000 into our reserve. We had for roads and bridges and culverts. We have a barely adequate funding source that has been used over the years for our roads. And I think there's a difference between roads and bridges. Like roads, you know, we had that discussion at budget time, whether or not we let roads go, maybe, you know, not tar and chip or pave them, you know, hard surface, maybe resort back to gravel. You know, the roads are all passable, but when a bridge or culvert fails, doesn't matter how good the road is, it's closed. So, you know, we gotta get this started, and I'm not sure where that magic number has to be. I had mentioned 100,000 at budget time, another 100,000, which is a 1.3% tax increase, more than what we were proposing, you know. And, you know, the special levy, yeah, one way or another, I think we gotta do it. And I'm just not, I just see the big picture at the end of the balance sheet, and we just don't have the money there, and we're only fooling ourselves if we don't start to contribute. And, you know, all we need is another infrastructure failure, another bridge or culvert failure, and then we're really in trouble. You know, we're doing Taylor Road this year, but we have such little wiggle room as far as our ability to fund these things. It's just, you know, that's why I'm just not sure if I want to put roads and bridges together as far as an increase in the budget or a special levy for the two of them. I would much sooner maybe concentrate on just bridges and culverts. Like I said before, a bridge, if it fails, it doesn't matter if the road is a two-lane landing strip at the airport. I mean, it's not a maintained road. So, and the biggest thing we gotta try and convey to the public, I guess, if you will, is the need for this, because we can do whatever we want today, and another term of council come in and they could just flush it and say, no, we're not going to put that taxation, that extra money in the taxation, or we're going to get rid of the special levy. And that would be just, to me, totally preposterous, because if they look at these numbers, and we got the bridge report, we need 750,000 at the high end. I'm not proposing we get to that level. I'm not even sure if we can get to the minimum level. But I think we got to get a long ways towards that 400,000 to make this a viable, you know. And, you know, we're going to actually be at 400,000. We're going to be rolling the dice, because our bridge report and culvert report identifies over the next 10 years what we need to have, and those numbers are from the next 10 years. So we got to get there. How we get there, I guess, you know. Too bad they didn't have asset management. I think that was almost forced upon municipalities to recognize maybe their shortcomings, because we cannot sit and wait on upper level of government funding. It would be a beautiful world if we could say, you know, go to the province or the feds and say, you know, this is how much money we need to fix this and this and this. But that just isn't there. We cannot afford not to be moving towards something to, you know, if it comes in, that's great. But, you know, we got to get, to me, well, I had jotted down here 75% in that 10-year period that we identified in that bridge report, get towards, you know, 75% of that number that was put in that bridge report. And I think I'd like to see, if you will, maybe separate the roads out a little bit and just we continue down now, which is an inadequate amount, but it's hardly maintaining the status quo. As far as stormwater and catch basins, that would be coming out of the water.
No,
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 you're-
they're part of roads, yes. Stormwater is part of roads.
Okay. All right, good point, Mayor Byvelds. When I saw that, when I read this over the other day, I thought, well, that should be, but yeah, you know, stormwater, storm sewer, as catch basins, yeah, okay. That clarifies that. That's all I'm gonna say for right now. We gotta start. It's not a very pleasant thing to have to do, especially 6 or 7 months before an election, but if anybody would look at the numbers that we've been looking at for the last year or two, any reasonable person would say, you guys are in a mess. You've got to start this. We can't, you just can't ignore it any longer. It's been ignored for the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And this is where we are now. Yeah. Hello, Mayor. As far as asset management plan, I think we gotta move towards it somehow. How we do it, that'll be in the next group of slides, I think.
Councilor Lewis?
First of all, I'd like to thank you so far. I understand where Councillor Mellon's coming from. But my train of thinking is, at the cost of everything out there today, like, you drive by service stations, gas, 184.9, diesel, 204.9. Food is just climbing every day. You know, when you go to a grocery store and you're looking at a steak and you look at the price and it says $24.99. Whoa! People are out there, they're working, both are working, minimum wage. I understand that we should have money in the reserve, but how much money do we have to have there? You know, and I think that is the $649,000 question. Do you want to, it's nice to have the reserve, but do you want to rob the people where they cannot survive? You know, that's where I'm coming from. You know, and I have I don't have an issue with having reserves and putting it up a little bit at a time. But right now, I believe myself that this is not the time. You know, people are just surviving now. And do we want to add another tax or increase the taxes to where they're not surviving? And myself personally, I don't think I want to go down that road. I understand our infrastructure. I understand the situation that our infrastructure is in. But I'm just not happy of robbing the ordinary person of the last 25 cents that they have in their pocket. And I think that's where I'm going to leave it for right now, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor?
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks, Lachlan. So far, and I like your style of presentation. You've given us a lot to think about. I recognize the infrastructure debacle that we're in. And I like the fact that you did state that all municipalities are finding themselves in, because we seem to be, sometimes we're in this, little hole and we think we're the only ones, but in reality it's across Ontario for the infrastructure. A couple of things I got out of your presentation so far. I really like that invest it wisely and investing in your community, and I'd really like to explore investing some dollars for a good return. I think that's why pension boards do it. I think that, people will roll their eyes and say, oh, the Ontario Teachers Pension Board is so well off. They've invested in this and they've invested in that. And I think municipalities need to get with the program on that. You can't always go to the taxpayer, if you will, and raise the taxes. To Councillor Lewis's point, when I sit here, 15 years ago, as a single mom, if the gas prices doubled like they did, I would be struggling. Now I'm in the top 10%, but I remember the days of the struggle. So I'm not willing to handcuff the families in our community that are struggling and just don't know where they're going, because to Councillor Mellon's point, this has been ignored for 40 years, and I'm not saying we need to ignore it further. I'm saying we need to get creative. In the financial world, there are different ways to deal with this, and I'd really like to explore that and see what that would look like, what municipalities are able to do. I think we've gotten to that point where we need to look at that as an option. And South Dundas has already done that somewhat with our water, our hydro and our water when we invested in the utility company. We're not completely adverse to doing something like that and having a return, a nice return payment every year. So I that really jumped out to me. And I know it would take some planning, and yes, there is some risk involved, but I don't know, I get my investment statements, and we just got out of a pandemic, and some of them are doing extremely well. So there is some option. I like that. I like that you actually put that subtly on the table, and I'd like to explore that. But to the point, there's a tax levy for specific, while responsible, would absolutely decimate some of our families, and I'm not prepared to vote yes on that at this point. So.
Okay, so we went beyond where I'd like to go, but that's okay. So I'm going to stick to the ask was, and then that's just on asset management, and we all knew that was going to be. I agree with Councillor Mellon. When I seen that, and I wasn't on council at that time, said that's the province making municipalities more responsible for what they need to spend, instead of always going back to the province for the dollars. And the provincial government has been, not too bad with us, but I also believe they did it because they had to. It's a conservative government, and we voted one in to be more responsible with the dollars, and we came from an administration that just loved spending money, so they reined it back in, but then they ran into the pandemic, and that was the end of that. And they got generous in the last year by doubling the OCIF, the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund, and still was fairly generous. Still, are fairly generous with the Ontario Municipal Infrastructure, or what's the other fund?
Gas tax?
No.
Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund?
Yes, the partnership fund. They still stuck to that. I think there's risk going forward that if they get reelected, that they're going to have no choice but to tighten things down. Healthcare needs money more than municipalities, and that's life going to be happening in Ontario. Having said all that, I think your presentation certainly shows us that how far we are behind. I think the bridge, Taylor Road Bridge, really stuck out. Nobody was ready for that, and conversely, and it's the same when I go with our water and sewer assets that we're still, paying dollars on, and we'll just take the $18 million spent on the water plant and didn't have to borrow all that. We're still paying the payments. So when the payments technically get done, we should just know we're not going to take that money and that's going to reserves for the next one. Trouble is, you can't reserve it all. There's no way. I think politically, it just would not work to be sitting on. We had $2 million ready for Taylor Road Bridge because somebody was wise enough to do that. I'll guarantee there's going to be a council that's going to look at that and raid that piggy bank very fast, because it's just a habit we have. We all have that. Even do that at home. Like I do. We do take out money and put it in what I call a house account, and it did fix the roof, because I knew the roof was going. So, okay, we got to put so much weight, and we had the money for the roof. So it's very disciplined to do that. It's not, but you got, first of all, got to have the money to do it, which we don't. And second of all, as I said, you got to have discipline to sit on it and sit on it and sit on it till that asset disappears. I'm kind of in two camps on that, because the challenge of this generation paying for the next one technically isn't fair, because they've paid for it and then they don't get to enjoy it, because the future generations get to enjoy it, and nobody's going to say they're going to shove that money away. So it's a balancing act. I think if you have half the money there and have to borrow half of it, I'm good with that. Trouble is, you can't borrow forever. We're running into that wall hard too as a municipality. And we've done our best in when I ran in 2018, wanting to make sure that the reserves are in a good place was what I wanted to accomplish. I think we're good, but we're not perfect, because as Councilor Mellon alluded to, we got more bridges than Taylor Road Ridge to deal about. Cahoon Bridge is done too. It's going to be an easier fix possibly, but you still haven't got any money set aside for it at all. And and we have another number of bridges that aren't done yet, but there's no preparation for dealing with them. I know at the counties, counties have been very fortunate that they've got reserves, they've got levels of taxation that keep that asset management ahead. Some of that was done in the past where you all of a sudden had a 7% increase, and the next year you didn't drop it down, you just kept it, and now we got more money to spend. And I know we've been accused at SDG that we're probably taxing too much, but I'd rather have that we are comfortable in what we do and have the money to do what we need to do than not do it. As I said, we're not there at South Dundas. It's real hard, and you weren't here during the Ontario Street talk, but that started at $1 million and went to 2.5, and we sat here and had to endure it because something happened. So you never know. You just never know how to, and we did it, but we can't do that everywhere. And do we need to have that hard discussion? Like, we don't want to drop levels of service, but it's nobody wants to go back to a gravel road. I want to live on a gravel road, but they're cheap. So that's the cheap end. The ultra paved road is the expensive end. I think probably some of the paved roads in South Dundas will end up being service treated and go halfway in between. Not the end of the world, as long as the roads can handle what traffic is on them. But as scary as asset management is, I think it's something that I recognize having to do here, having to do at my business as a farmer. If you don't have some fund set aside for that rainy day, and something happens, like if an engine goes in a tractor or a transmission, you got to have $20,000 sitting aside or more. So those things do happen. We're here too. So having said all that, I think I appreciate going through all those numbers. It'll be interesting how we're going to either A, use the numbers, or B, be forced to use the numbers, because the government's going to know it, right? They're going to say, what are you doing? What are you doing to plan for your big hole? If you do nothing, I can see the government saying, well, you're not really trying, so why should we help you? Now, conversely, we've watched governments help municipalities that don't do the jobs. I'll be honest, that is a frustrating thing at SDG. Yes, we have a few dollars, but since we look good and have no debt, government look at the financial review information. Oh, we don't need to send them any money. But a small municipality we don't tax. We want to be the cheapest taxes municipality in Ontario. And then they can go to their MPP and all of a sudden they get an instant pot of funds. And I don't think that's fair. I think in the end they try to treat us fair, but we all know it's not. I can just look across the borders and see what happens in Ontario. You've got a good MPP, you're going to get some dollars coming into your municipalities. I'd rather have a bit of both. I think we still got to be responsible. I tend to want to be one of those persons that, you know, thinks ahead, and I'm conservative. I'm not the big gambler. I'd rather have the money sitting there and being smart about it, or loan it and see how we go through there. So, not saying anything about the next part. So I'm gonna, I know the council have started down that road, but I want Lachlan to go through that presentation first. Does council want to do a break now, or you want to go through the presentation first, then a break, and then we'll have a chat on where we're going to go with that? Okay, continue for the next 15 minutes?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, so you go through that, Lachlan, and we'll see, give us your take on where, you know, we did have the discussion. We asked them to come back with the feasibility of doing either an infrastructure levy or something. And I know we had a discussion on where we want to go, and that's fair enough, but I think it's fair to at least look at the numbers, and then, you know, we can say yes, no, and if we say yes, then we got an option. If we say no, then at least that information is readily available for the next group of councilors that are here, either all of us or none of us, as I say. Go ahead.
And through you, Mr. Mayor, may I address the borrowing and reserve? Just a comment from me, if it's
Sure.
okay? Okay, great. So I would be remiss not to mention that when you borrow, it is just, there is taxation on the next council too. It's like the Taylor Road Bridge, as much as, and this isn't, like, it is an economic reality of South Dundas. So by borrowing that money, your budget in 2022 looks good. Next year's budget with the repayments, it's essentially, all things remaining equal, 1.5 to 1.9% added on to next year's taxation just by that. So there is that, as you said, like, who's paying the future, the past or now, and that is a hard balance. I do agree with that. I want to recognize that whenever I talk about reserves, I always want sustainable, so that over time everybody pays for it, and sometimes people pay it forward, some people will pay it towards the end. But certainly a valid point that you don't want today paying totally for the bill for tomorrow. It should be spread across time, and I think borrowing in that case can be advantageous, and it's just, there is a cost of borrowing too.
I will say this, and you weren't here when we had to do it, but, you know, we had to borrow $1.7 million to cover a dump that we had no money for. So that means the residents now are paying for a dump that they can't use. That's a real hard challenge in anybody's mind. You have to do it, I understand that.
Yeah.
But the prudent council should have been always putting money aside. And our auditors always warned us, but, you know, it's just like anything else. All of a sudden something else comes along. Well, we got to go raid that piggy bank because it's landfill, and we can justify it. But, you know, like, I'll be honest, like, when I started in 2008, there was never to talk about closing dumps, a little talk. Oh, we got to close them someday, but the dumps are good for a long time. And all of a sudden, long time stops, and then oh crap, now what do we do? And rightly so, we didn't put any money aside. The old Williamsburg Township didn't put any money aside, and South Dundas didn't put any money aside. Now we're trying to do something with Matilda because we know we're going to pay another $1.5 to $2 million to cover it. So we're trying to be prudent, but that borrowing money just to put a bunch of ground on top of a dump is not very good use of money. Has to be done. No. That's a challenge.
No, and I remember through our SDNG treasurers meetings hearing that was coming, and South Glengarry is a few years away from that. So I would, from my former location, thank you for living it, because I think conversations with you, with other councillors, perhaps even at the counties, I believe the transfer to reserves in South Glengarry would be close to 230 to 300,000 per year for dumps, and it was increased fairly recently, and I think I know why.
So go ahead,
Okay.
Give us our options, and then we'll stew on them and then go from there. Thanks.
Yes, so options available to start this, the recognition of the infrastructure deficit, and to perhaps start, or not perhaps, hopefully fund future assets as well as present assets, is infrastructure levy. That was discussed among council. I believe there was a 4% number that was bandied about, as well as the 100,000. Infrastructure transfer to reserves. They're part and parcel of the same thing, just different ways of doing it and showing it. It's how you want to communicate it, and that's recommended by administration. And then there is the do nothing approach, which I put not recommended by administration, and I didn't want to speak on your behalf. Probably, if it's not this budget cycle, the next several budget cycles, I don't think that would be recommended by council either. I think everybody acknowledges what and where we are. And if I can touch, let me know if I overstep, Mr. Mayor, it is quite correct that in times of pain, and we all see this at the provincial and federal level, 2008 to 2010 would be a good time for governments to spend, and then 2011 to 2020 would be a good time for governments to save. It's always balancing that. When the times are good, you should save, or when times are bad, and that's how good government should be. And I can, just to touch on Councillor Gardner, or Deputy Mayor Gardner, and Councillor Lewis's comments is, now is not the best time for the world, but moving into this, soon we hope it will be, and then we should start really saving. So tax comparators, and this is something I prepare every year from South Glengarry, so I brought it here because it is handy to know. Perhaps some of my influence in South Glengarry, it does have a tax levy, and there also has the waterfront where South Stormont and South Dundas have OPG land predominantly along your water. South Glengarry's water is below Saunders Dam, so it is all developed, and that's the often called the assessment-rich South Glengarry, because that is there. That being said, tax rates can fluctuate, so you can see a range of taxation, and this is just net levy requirement, not counting in OSIF, OMPF, and Community Benefit Fund, formerly gas tax. So South Glengarry at 9.5, and then you have a considerable drop, and you have kind of I call them the comparators, which is the Dundases and Stormont, and then Glengarry would be that municipality perhaps that you would touch, in my opinion, touched on, is that they like to keep taxes low, but they also like to ask the government for, and they're much more successful than South Glengarry. I'm sorry if that's, hello Kim Goyette, treasurer of North Glengarry, sorry for putting you under the bus there. And then North Stormont would be the smallest. So if you're looking at your comparators, you'd typically say your neighbor to the north and your two neighbors to the east would be your closest. A little bit different for South Glengarry, just on your top. So 13,100 or 13,150 people in South Glengarry, South Stormont about the same. I believe South Dundas 10,150. Am I wrong with that? 11,000. Okay. So and then North Dundas would be similar to that. So that gives you some perspective to what other municipalities are doing, and these are all, if they're not all final, they're next to final for this year. So it is live, and I can assure you that South Glengarry, again, I just speak from my practice, and I'm sorry for rambling on that. I'm sure administration gets tired of me bringing in some of my history, which is all South Glengarry. Is I remember one year our taxation went up about $600,000 when it was less than what it is now. So these conversations don't have to be that aggressive. It's just that there are other municipalities that through this information try to do that. So infrastructure levy recap. Council discussed tackling the infrastructure deficit. Some of council was strongly opposed to a rate increase. If I may put a name to it, I believe Mayor Byvolds, you kind of said you'd like to see this is the levy regular and this is the infrastructure levy. This is very specific to infrastructure, so that was the way you wish to communicate that. And that discussion on 4%, and funds would be directed to an infrastructure reserve or projects that need to be done, because you can tackle it in one way, do the projects, or save them for the projects for next year. In an infrastructure reserve, through doing a little research, because I love other people doing my research for me, St. Catharines had done a good amount of work. It's 2015 when they did it, and there were bigger municipalities. And sometimes I look at bigger municipalities, and if they do something simply, I kind of say we should do something simply because we don't have the layers of staffing, and we shouldn't. But 5 do have dedicated reserve investments, and they were typically about 1% for infrastructure, but they all blended it with their tax rate. So it's just added to the levy, like it would be a reserve transfer. So your taxation would be 1% higher, and it would be a reserve transfer. And then talking to Lisa Harvey at Municipal Affairs and Housing, she mentioned those two. I asked Woolwich if they do have a separate one on 4 occasions. I have not heard back, but that's okay. They have a 2.5 infrastructure increase and a 0.85 for climate. So it looks like most most municipalities or corporations that are municipalities go about 1%, and then Woolwich is a little higher, and that's southwestern Ontario. So pay the piper, that was your line. I almost brought my bagpipes in because I am a Glengarry boy.
You had been banned from the building.
Yeah. I occasionally need my sheet music in front of me still. I'm not great, and I'm good on the chanter, though. And that doesn't matter. Back on point. So infrastructure levy would look something like that. You'd have your taxation, which is already approved, and then you'd have that 0.02%, which would be added. So I took these pictures because it's kind of like looking at a receipt. In that way, you're kind of, it'd be like, would you like to buy this from me for $50 plus 4%? So here's your $50 and here's your 4% for your levy. Alternatively, it can say like, this is for the business and this is for our infrastructure, which is also a nice way to line it. And then the way that I'd say administration, and I feel that's all of administration, I've talked to everybody, but the people who have had this conversation, it would be preferred to do it as one number, if only because it comes to the same conclusion, and aside from the extra line on your tax bill, it goes to the same spot. So that's why I have the gas station, because you don't pay your gas, you don't drive up and say it's 90 cents plus 20 cents plus 30 cents, they put it all in one. So it's just the two ways to look at it. Can we do an infrastructure levy separate? So I have that question is outstanding with VADM. I'm led to believe that it is possible, so I just wanted that to be available, because if it's not available, I don't want to even discuss it, because then you get your hopes up for something we can't do. And then, does the majority of council desire a separate levy? And are you strongly with that? Are you strongly opposed to the blended rate? So that would mean it's just a reserve transfer, part of your regular budget. And if not, if you're not strongly opposed as a council, we can clearly communicate via our tax schedule below and our mail out. And the next slide has an example. It can be gussied up with communications. I'm sure they can make better things than circles. And I have an example of one in South Glengarry that has nice little pictures. But we can show it here to taxpayers, and we can show it on our, I believe on mail out there would be an insert, and we could show it like this too. So it wouldn't be hidden if we were to go the administrative route, which is a reserve transfer. That's even if this council wishes, based on the discussions that will be had next. But we would prefer it to be part of the budget and a reserve transfer, whether it be this council or these conversations will come up for next council too. So it's kind of one of those things that you're going to hear about this at the very least in 2022 and 2023, and then I'm sure Sarah will take the flag and run with it. So I guess for discussion, that's my last slide. I'll just bring it back to, I guess, paying the piper. Are we paying him now or are we paying him later? And which way would we like to communicate that payment to the piper?
Okay. So with that, it's 10:26. We'll have a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and have another roundtable on that and move on from there. So. Okay, and welcome back for our extended break. So we left at the discussion of what we're going to do, the options of doing either an infrastructure levy, an infrastructure transfer to reserves, or doing nothing. We've already heard from council on their preliminary thoughts. In the end, it may end up coming back to a council meeting for a firm decision, because I think that's the right place to do it. But if everybody said no here today, then no is no, and I don't have a problem with that. But we are missing one councillor. I got to keep remembering that. So nobody's heard where I want to be on this. As I said at budget time, I think it's something we need to look at. And I'm still in the infrastructure levy, where it's a separate item on the tax bills. And the reason I do that is twofold. If it's separate on a tax bill, people know that that's where that money's going. It also makes council aware that that money's going in that reserve. The challenge of just putting it on the rate is there's nothing to hold the council to keep that money going where it needs to go. If it becomes the big piggy bank and council needs money, we'd run it here ourselves, doing through budget. Where can we rate a reserve to do this, whatever? That's my challenge with that. Yes, it's an infrastructure reserve, but we all know how well reserve funds go. Like you can't lock it in. There's no provincial rule that's going to lock you into that, because there's nothing there to do it. So that's my challenge with it. Having said all that, we technically need 10. I was suggesting 5 or 4. I will say today, it's a big challenge to do it because of the way things are going. And that's the challenge. The timing is now poor. I still don't want to throw it away. It would be a good thing to say that this council did something that was forward thinking and started putting money aside for infrastructure, whether it's roads, bridges, buildings. Like, we haven't even talked buildings. I know that there's the thought of some people out there that we just tax what we need that day and deal with it, but it doesn't work. It's that up and down thing. There's no way you're going to put 10% on it one year and go down -5 the next. People will think, what, you guys can't run a business. You can't run it like that. You can't run, we have to have reserve funds to moderate taxation. I think that's a way of looking at how to deal with reserve funds, moderate taxation. We do it with fleet reserve. We could do that with an infrastructure reserve. Would we have had $1 million, almost $2 million ready for Taylor Road Bridge? Probably not. But that's a prime example of not being prepared, an extremely prime example of not being prepared. We were all told it was getting poor, and we had to start thinking about it, and we started putting pennies away, and it's truly, now it looks like pennies when we have a couple $100,000 put away. I'm thinking, well, we need $2 million. What are you doing with a couple $100,000? That's the down payment on it. However, we'll do what we need to do to deal with whatever we have to deal with. But we have to have money in the bank to do it. Or we borrow. And I don't mind borrowing. I don't have, we're still in a reasonable time with interest rates, but that reasonable time has come to an end now. And the longer, going forward, I suspect, the 2-3% we've been looking at for a while is going to be 4, 5, 6. And to be honest, 4, 5, 6 is pretty normal in a normal world. I do remember the 20% times. I was not in a 20% time, nor were my parents at that time. But I have paid 14%. That I do remember very firmly on building a heifer barn in the 90s. So that, if you don't have any money aside and you're borrowing at 10%, that's a killer. That's just poor planning then. So I still, as I said, like the levy, don't want to do it just on the rate because I know it'll disappear. timing's poor. And that's where I'll leave it for today. We'll go this way around and then
Okay.
final say on it, and then we'll see where we go.
Sure, I mean, the bulk of my issues with it now is the timing. It's absolutely the timing. If we required, I don't think I'd go as high as 5, but for me right now, I think it's something that should be considered in the future, but the timing right now is just not, I'm not comfortable with the timing.
You need to rant further. I know you made a very good point, but go ahead.
Well, I'm like you, Mayor. I'd rather see it go into a levy, and that shows up on the tax bill, that this is what it costs you, and it's for infrastructure. As you say, if you put it somewhere else, council will be council. You rob from Peter to pay Paul. So if it's in there, and everybody knows that you're paying X percentage for your infrastructure levy, that's where I would like to see that. The timing, no, not at this time. For maybe the 2023 budget would most likely be better. Hopefully we'll be out of what we're in right now, and that's most likely, if I'm here or if I'm not here, that's most likely where I could live with that. So, thank you.
Councilor Mellon?
Well, I'm not changing my mind, whether it's a special levy or it's money that's built into the budget. I totally agree, and that it has to be set aside and only used for that, and it is conveyed and, communicated to the taxpayer that, if it's a 2%, let's say, which is $150 or $150,000, that money has to be, and I totally agree with what you're saying, Mayor Bybels, that you can't have a pot of money sitting over there that, you might want to, rob the piggy bank someday. That has to be utilized or set aside and only used for that money. So whether you do a special levy or whether you incorporate it into the budget, that money would go to that reserve and only can be used for bridges, culverts, or roads, or however you want to set it up. And I think both of them could be an infrastructure levy, yes, and it can be conveyed to the public, that, there's a 2% increase in the budget, that's going to generate $200,000, say, or whatever the number might be, 150,000. That would only be used for that, but that has to be, that has to be ironed in stone as far as I'm concerned. You can't have that money floating around out in reserve funds. You might know more, Mayor Bybels. I think Deputy Mayor Gardner has already alluded to it earlier that, all municipalities are going to be in this or are in this situation. I think we need to get after AMO and Roma and lobby a more assertive lobbying effort to our upper level government, especially when things coming in with the amount of money that has been spent over the last 2 years. I can see that the funding sources could dry up, and if they dry up to a certain, and they're not available, we could find ourselves in a very, we could find ourselves in a pickle, because at one time, asset management was going to be tied to your ability to apply for funding, and I think it still is. So if we don't have something in place, and you've already spoken about this, Mayor Bybels, if we don't show to the upper level of government, say that we're at least doing this, it might not be enough, but if we're at least we're chipping away at it on a municipal level, that funding become available. If we don't do anything, they're going to say, well, hey, you guys didn't put any money into your roads or your bridges or, or whatever infrastructure you want to label it at, you know, why should we, you know, you automatically get checked off that application list, and that'll be the scary part. You know, what else did I hit? And you know, so I'm, you know, timing is an awful thing, but I mean, is there ever a good time? You spoke earlier, you know, how much, I can remember on the farm, we borrowed money at 19%. And at one time, I think I got up to 21% in that area. You imagine if we had to borrow the money at 19%, we would have to shut this place down. We couldn't, it just could not function. And if we're put into the position where we had to borrow money at 19% and we can't do it, we do nothing, or the reality of the situation is we'll have to close infrastructure, or we'll have to lower our level of service that we're providing to the public. That's the reality of the situation coming down the road, and I can see it coming probably, unfortunately, sooner than later. If you just look at the bridge report, that to me is the glaring one. That's what, you know, has really kick-started the hamsters up here and said, wow, we're in trouble. So, you know, that's, to me, that's the reality of the situation. We got to start somewhere. I don't know what that magic number would be. At budget time, I said we needed to put 200,000 in, which would be about a 2.4%, whatever the number might be. You know, it's a start. It's not enough, but it's a start. And I know it's never a good time, and probably there's going to be always something that's going to make it, you know, whether it's a pandemic or, you know, that, you know, the tragic war that's going on in Europe. There's always going to be something that's going to probably hamstring a council from not doing this. I guess the reality of the situation is whatever we decide, well, if we decide to do nothing, well, that's easy, but if we decide to do a special levy, we decide to do a taxation and an extra add on in the taxation, that won't be kicking in until 2023. I don't think it's realistic or possible to, you know, already into the 22 budget to add something on extra. Now, I guess it could be, but that's, you know, that's the thing. Like, I mean, even, you know, we're going to be we're going to be just a few months away from an election, you know, and you know, halfway through probably, if we even decided to go ahead with something, we'd be halfway through the 2022 year, and then try and implement a special levy or an added taxation, which would have to be put on to, you know, second taxation bills or whatever. So I don't think, you know, you couldn't, you know, halfway through a year, you couldn't say, ask somebody, you know, the public out there that are struggling as it is, to say, okay, well, you got to come up with the full amount for 2022. You know, we could only probably realistically ask for, you know, a prorated amount. You know, if it's 6 months worth of the 2022 budget, you know, half the budget, half the amount that we would, you know, sort of set on. And, you know, and like I said earlier, this is, you know, every council has to be on board with this. We can't, you know, and that would be a communication thing as much as anything. You know, any council can say, well, we're not going to do the special levy, or we're not going to add that extra, you know, 1-2% on to the tax bill to be used only for infrastructure, identified infrastructure. So that'll be the part that scares me as much as anything. You know, it's got to be, otherwise it's a moot point. We're sitting here, we're gonna, you know, beat ourselves to death on this if we don't have consensus across the board in future councils. You know, so am I right in the presumption that we can't very well implement it this year anyways?
Go ahead, Lachlan.
If I may, I believe one of the consequences if we did implement it, we'd have to, I've never change tax rate once it's kind of been passed through budget that way. However, you can always rescind that bylaw and do it. A consequence would be all your pre-authorized payment individuals or monthly payments, they would all of a sudden see a bump in when we go to put on the final rate, because if the tax rate would increase, their monthly payments, which do oscillate on the final, depending if it's higher or lower than last year, because taxes, pre-authorized payment in particular is based on half of last year. So if that bump, they'd see that. So I believe it is possible. However, there would be, like, you would be likely called on it, and
Realistically, I don't think it's probably be feasible or wise. And so, yeah, I'm still in favor of doing something as soon as we can. Whether we do half of it, you know, I don't know how, obviously with you know, the numbers already out there and the tax bill's already been, you know, figured, and that will be the problem of doing it this year, whether you do it. Yeah.
You done?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, Lachlan, but we've only sent out the interim bill, so technically we could change A, tax rate, or B, an infrastructure levy on top of what the rate is. It would be a hit. It's going to be hit no matter what. They're going to hit in the 277. What are we at? We want it 2.82, so everybody's getting hit with that. I'm on a pre-approved payment, so I know that it's going to go, I'm going to have the makeup. So technically we can do it. It's just a matter is the timing right within our circle. Probably would have been a better timing thinking it last year. I think we're all challenged with timing from an economic point of view. If I would have been all right if we didn't get hit with this, you know, the inflationary pressures this war is taking on society. It's mainly fuel, but it's gonna circle like down. Like the truckers are paying $2 a liter for diesel, and I'll tell you one thing: you don't go very far with a truck on a liter of diesel. So and they're going to have more money, which means our goods are going to be more money, and everything is going to ratchet up because of this. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's our part in what we have to do to deal with, I hate to say it, stupid people across the world. And the stupid people is one person that's president of Russia. I don't want to say his name because it's not good, but as much as it's not our conflict, we will pay the price for that conflict. It's like our previous generations paid the price for World War I and II. And hopefully it doesn't go beyond Ukraine, but even where it is now is causing a lot of issues. I think, you know, Councillor Mellon's right. We got it. Doing nothing is not really the answer, but I think that is the answer this year from my point of view too. I will say this: I think if we are sitting here, then we know the problem. The inherent problem is that there may be new people here, and that's okay. I don't have a problem with that. Whatever South Dundas electors decide, they get what they get. But I'm hoping that the people of South Dundas understand that this is not an easy thing to deal with. It's a solution that has to be dealt with. One way or the other, it's got to, you know, pay the piper. We all want to make sure that our infrastructure doesn't fail and doesn't fail at the wrong time. And I always believe in being forward thinking, because there's nothing worse than having a council that said, we'll just deal with it when time comes. That's just not forward thinking. We've done well till now. As Councillor Lewis says, we've never backed off a major issue. It's there, we deal with it, drive on. But this one is something that the next council is going to have to deal with. And the scary part of the whole thing is, and to be honest, whether it's me or someone else sitting in this chair, I hope that they have the foresight to think that this is the right thing to do and bite the bullet in the first year and be done with it. Because correct me if I'm wrong, but the reassessments will hit them in '24, right?
Yeah.
And not that reassessments are as scary as everybody has made them to be. I almost cringe when I hear a counselor saying we're missing out on all this tax dollars. I'm thinking, you're not missing out on any tax dollars. You can put the rate wherever you want it. That is a fallacy. There are some municipalities, including municipalities in SDG, that just look at the tax rate, and whatever the assessments go up, we're good. And that's the way South Dundas was till 2009, when I sat in the chair and made that statement. We will not do that any longer, and it was ratcheted down. Because I do remember having a conversation with a politician, and they were putting the rates up 7% and taking the assessment too. And I said, that's not right. You're literally getting 12, 15%. I said, oh, that's what we always did, and that's the way we're going to do it. Well, that kind of closed mind never works for me. And some people would accuse me of being fairly closed-minded at times. I think the challenge with that reassessment in '24 is the winners and losers. I think there's going to be people that are going to be significantly higher than the average. It goes up, and there's going to be some that will be below it. But it's all going up. It's just a matter of somebody doing the right math and making it all work. But as I say, the winners and losers will be the challenge. Having said all that, it sounds like we're not leaning that way. I know there's a councillor not here, so my preference is that you just bring a report to council at a council meeting. Put these options on the table. We'll be more concise in our approach to comments, Councillor Mellon. You can't ramble for half an hour, because we've done that. We've done, and we'll have a weekend to stew about it. And there's never a bad thing. And people, those who are watching and the press who are there can comment. And I don't have a problem with that. I'm open to ideas. As long as you got all the information when you make your statement, we're good. And I think we've done that. So asset management, as I said, is going to be important. Probably more important to the next council than this one. But we'll see where we go from here. Okay, anything further? Okay, seeing none, I thank you, Lachlan, for all your work, and Sean and Tyler. Some people would say you guys are all crazy dealing with numbers all day, but it's a good thing. From my perspective, and I don't mind numbers, just don't baffle me with them. Hopefully that I do appreciate the work that was done, and I think council does too. Okay, with that, we'll move on, and that's the end of our staff report. So we'll be moving into closed session here now. So before I have the clerk for a closed session motion. I'll tell the audience that this will be the end of the live streaming, because after closed session we'll be just going into adjournment and no further action. And we've never done that in the past, and we're not starting today. Thank council so far for their work, thank all staff for their work, and thank the audience for participating. With that,
Moved by Deputy Mayor Gardner, seconded by Councillor Lewis, that council proceed in camera at 11:08 a.m. pursuant to Section 239 2B of the Municipal Act, more specifically personnel matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees, regarding staff.
all heard motion, those in favor, opposed if any, motion carries. With that, thank you very much.